Hello, welcome everybody. My name's Carly Morris. I'm from the Internet Society, and it's great to see so many faces online. Hopefully you can all hear me. Before we get started today, I just wanted to run over some discussion guidelines. So in order to respect sound quality for those listening and for those speaking, we ask that you please kindly mute your mics when you're not talking. If you have any questions, you can post these in the chat, and our moderator will do his best to address these within the time available. Just be sure to identify yourselves, if possible, with your first name and the country that you're from. Any questions will be typed in French, Portuguese, or Spanish will be translated and sent to the moderator. But all answers to these questions will be in English. If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand capability in Zoom. We'll be keeping track of that queue. Note that this discussion will be recorded and streamed on Facebook Live. And in case anybody is tweeting or sharing on social media today, we are using the hashtag #TheNext25. So without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to welcome our President and CEO, Ms. Catherine Brown, to open the discussion.
Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted that you have joined us. I see from our internet wonder numbers that we have people from all over the world joining us, which was our hope. We're very proud of the Internet Society's community. You have enthusiastically joined us at a very important time when, after 25 years of being in existence, we're looking at and celebrating where we came from, but looking very carefully about the future. We know that in these 25 years, the internet has delivered on many of its promises. We believe with all of our hearts and souls that this is the internet of opportunity, that it has brought enormous opportunity to those who have access to it. And we worry, and work hard to ensure that everyone in the world has access. We also know from some work we've been doing, which I will describe in a moment, that there are some deep anxieties around the implications of a digitally connected world that have shown up in our economies, in our cultures, in our communities, that we believe we need as a community to also address. What and who we are emanates from our technological roots. As we know, we were founded by the very internet pioneers who wrote the first codes that allowed this interconnectivity to happen and to grow. And the Internet Society was founded to ensure that the idea of an internet society would thrive and grow, and in our view, follow and embrace the values upon which we were founded. Okay, so what is it we face in the 21st century in 2017? We see some still, by the way, huge opportunities in both the parts of the economies that have fully embraced the internet, and we see in those economies that are just coming on, have been online for a while, are starting to reach the kind of capacity that will really tip the scales. We see huge opportunities and innovation happening. And across all of these economies, we see some worries. So we've done a couple of things that I want to highlight very quickly and then get to the topic at hand. We, about 18 months ago, launched what we call the Futures Project, where we appealed to many of you across our large community to talk to us about what are the trends that we see as technologists, as policy people, as civil rights and civil liberties people, as folks who care about users. What are the trends we see? And we've identified a number of them, you've identified a number of them that I think may well be familiar to you, and you're going to hear about that a little bit as we discuss, have this discussion today. I implore you to go to our website, which talks initially about our findings. I think it's Internet Society Futures, find it, and see what I think is the beginning of a very good presentation on these. The second thing, or there's a number of things we're doing, but a second important thing is we have partnered with some of the biggest influential convening bodies across the world to have a conversation about where we need to go, what it is we need to address to ensure that the internet remains trusted, remains the internet of opportunity, does not get captured by forces that affect our humanity in a way that we don't want to have happen. We have started conversations emanating from our technological roots as to what and how the technical community and the wider community ought to respond to this. An important event happened at Chatham House. One of the leading organizations in the world that brings people together to have conversations that are this important. We had in May 7th, correct, Emily? Yes, May 7th, we had both an open session, which I hope you take a look at, and you can right now reach it online and take a look at the conversation that happened around these issues there. And then a very kind of typical Chatham House conversation that was under the Chatham House rules, which means we can talk about the outcomes of that, but we can't say who said what. We planned this community forum in order to discuss some of the things we heard and saw, and to now get your input into this ongoing project we have, initiative we have, about gathering the thoughts about what our community thinks and feels about where we go for hashtag the next 25. So that's why we're here today. I couldn't be more delighted with the participation. I am hoping the conversation is global in nature, and therefore I am asking community members from any part of the world not to feel in the least bit intimidated to have something to say. You are all empowered. This is the internet, and there is no hierarchy here. So please contribute and be part of this enormously important conversation we're having. So with that, let me introduce Emily Taylor, who is the Associate Fellow for International Security at Chatham House. She is the moderator of today's session. She was very involved in the session we had last month. And I know, Emily, you're going to do a fabulous job of getting some important issues on the table. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And thank you for your opening remarks and your support for this public forum. As Kathy says, my name is Emily Taylor. I'm an Associate Fellow at Chatham House and the editor of the Journal of Cyber Policy. I'm also CEO of Oxford Information Labs. But we've been collaborating at Chatham House with the Internet Society in the spirit of the 25th anniversary, and we will also be collaborating on putting together an issue of the Journal of Cyber Policy with the Internet Society, dealing with issues of trust and access and multi-stakeholder governance. So without further ado, because we have a fantastic panel of speakers to kick off our conversation today, I'd like to introduce those, then we'll hear from each of those speakers in turn, and I'm hoping that we can keep those introductory remarks crisp and to the point so that we have as much time as possible for an interactive discussion. I know that the panelists all want that as well. So I'm going to introduce the panelists in their order of speaking. So first we will have Rebecca MacKinnon. It's a great privilege to introduce Rebecca today. She will be very well known to many of you as a leading author in this field. She is currently directing the Ranking Digital Rights project at New America, which I hope she will be speaking about, and has also been a co-founder of Global Voices and author of the seminal work Consent of the Networked in 2012. She's also a fluent Mandarin Chinese speaker and was CNN's bureau chief and correspondent in China and Japan between 1998 and 2004. So welcome to Rebecca. After Rebecca, we will hear from Dr. Ismail Shah, who ranks amongst Asia's most renowned ICT professionals, and he has expertise spanning cellular, internet and digital technologies. He's currently serving as the chairman of the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, the PTA, which role he's held since 2013. And amongst many, many other accomplishments, he's also a senior member of the IEEE USA, a member of the Institute of Electronics, Information and Communications Engineers, Japan, and has published more than 100 technical publications. So welcome to Dr. Shah. And last but certainly not least is Sally Shipman Wentworth from the Internet Society. She joined ISOC in 2009 and is currently Vice President of the Global Policy Development. Before that, she had a number of roles, including Assistant Director for Telecommunications and Information Policy at the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House from 2007 to 2009. And before that, she worked at the State Department on internet policy issues and was organizing the US negotiations for a number of UN treaty conferences, including the World Summit on the Information Society. So that's our speakers today. We're going to hear from each one in turn, and then we'll throw the floor open. As Carly said, please use the chat to make your comments and questions on to line them up. So with that, Rebecca, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Emily. I assume you can hear me. It's always good when the technology works. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about and that we've been talking about in other events and that we spoke about last month is how do we build an internet that reinforces and sustains the kind of society we want to have, and that reflects and reinforces the values of the kind of society we want to have. And that requires that everyone take responsibility, that governments, civil society, the technical community, companies, and everyone really think about what choices are we making in terms of design, in terms of governance, in terms of how we manage technology that actually contributes to a more, democratic, open society that really serves the interests of everyone using the internet, which hopefully will be more and more people over time. And we've hit some real challenges, and I'm going to let's see, I think I might have just gotten muted.
We just lost you for a second, but
sure. Yeah, okay, great. I don't know what happened. We're hitting some difficult times, I think, where because the internet has become so important, everybody's placing a great deal of expectation on it. Of course, everyone is trying to use the internet and the technologies and platforms available to serve their own purposes. And many of those purposes are not always, shall we say, positive. But unfortunately, what's happening a bit is, or more than a bit, is that the internet is getting blamed for a lot of things that we really need to think about what the root causes are here. So let's talk about extremism, for example. There's been a lot of discussion lately with Theresa May in the UK and other governments, sort of saying, okay, we need to weaken encryption effectively. We need to hold companies responsible for their activities of their users. because terrorists and extremists are using these platforms. Yet I think these governments are failing to take responsibility for the root causes of extremism, which I would argue are not the internet, but broader governance failures of economic policy, failures of geopolitics, failures of governance among nation states, and failures to respect and protect human rights, and failures to provide basic services and quality of life to citizens. And I think that is the root cause, frankly, of extremism around the world. I think that if we do go ahead and follow Theresa May's demands and the demands of some other governments, and we create backdoors to encrypted communication systems, and we allow governments to hold social media responsible for the activities of their users, I would suggest we will still have extremism unless some root causes that do not lie with the internet are addressed. And so I think it's important that the community that around the internet society point this out, and I think this needs to be pushed back more strongly. Certainly there are issues. Certainly companies need to do a better job of taking responsibility for what is enabled on their platforms, and working with all their stakeholders to figure out ways to address the use of their platforms by those who seek to commit harm to others and to violate the rights of others through those platforms. So certainly the corporate community has a role to play. But I think we're currently in a period right now where the discourse is not going to lead us in the direction of an internet that's going to support the kind of open and human rights friendly internet or society that we want to have. And we need to have some difficult conversations. And finally, just make a final point. I think one of our problems is that because the internet is globally interconnected, because we are using products and services and platforms that are global in scope, that have global user bases, the existing constructs of law and politics that were developed prior to the internet to address social problems are not fit for purpose in dealing with the problems we face on the internet today that are globally interconnected in nature. And so we urgently need more innovation when it comes to governance, when it comes to problem solving, both in the public sector and in the private sector, so that we can ensure that the internet does indeed fulfill its potential in the end. And so this is why I'm doing one particular project where I'm really benchmarking companies on their commitment to the rights of users. But what it's also showing is that governments in many countries are preventing companies from respecting the rights of users. So we have a lot of challenges ahead, and I really commend the Internet Society for supporting and fostering the dialogue we need to have.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for those opening remarks. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Shah for his comments. Dr. Shah, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, talking about WSIS, I'm in Geneva at WSIS, and this came from another panel where we talked about similar things. I agree with Rebecca, the points that she made and the root causes. And here I'd like to add a point especially from the developing country perspective, is that many of these root causes can actually be addressed using the internet. For example, in our country, we have a great number of people, especially the young people, without jobs. Internet can be used to create jobs. They are not financially included. Internet, using the mobile banking, for example, can be used to provide financial inclusion. Similarly, education, similarly, healthcare services, and there are actually many such initiatives which are being offered using the internet. So actually, internet can be used to address many of the root causes that Rebecca mentioned are causing all these other things. But unfortunately, even in our country, all these other issues related to the internet and related to the social media gets highlighted. And the countries, the nations, especially those who are in charge of keeping the law and order, they blame the internet for all these issues. So I have a dual challenge. On one side, we are still working on providing connectivity, connecting the unconnected, providing all these services, and on the other hand, there are people who would like the internet to be restricted. So we have to keep it a balance. Some of these the issues are related to basically understanding really the nature of the internet. So if on the side or in parallel, I would say, we also have to work on educating all the stakeholders who are involved in lawmaking, who are involved in making decisions, so that they know how the internet basically works and how it can be used for the benefit of the society, of the benefit of the humanity. So these are the kind of challenges that we have. Simultaneously, we are also trying these platforms to work with us. But as you know, many of these platforms and generally people are apprehensive about working with governments because they think that they would have some unnecessary restrictions on them. But I believe that the only way forward is that all of us work together and look at these aspects, try to work for resolving these issues that were raised by Rebecca, and we see them in real life, while simultaneously concentrating on actually the aspect which is good. And just to put things in perspective, probably same arguments were given when we had the printing press introduced in the humanities about some 500 years ago or so. So people had similar kind of arguments that there will be books published that would not be good for the society. So let's not have the printing press. So a similar example can be presented here. However, nowadays things are happening at a much faster pace. So that's why we need to actually get all these stakeholders together and work together to resolve these issues, take advantage of the issues, and I would say not unnecessarily highlight some of the negative aspects which are not really related to the internet. They are related to the ground realities of the country. Internet is just a tool that people use. So that's my bit, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Many thanks, Dr. Shah. I'm going to hand over now to Sally Wentworth for her remarks, and then we'll start the conversation. So, Sally, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emily, and it's wonderful to see so many of you online, and it's a pleasure to see you, Emily, Dr. Shah, Rebecca, and a number of others who were with us for the Chatham House discussion a few weeks back. I just would say to follow up on some comments that Kathy made, the origins of this discussion that we had in Chatham House was this understanding that was coming out of our futures work, that our community is really grappling with this tension between what we deeply believe are the benefits of the internet and the opportunities that it creates for humanity. But on the other hand, these challenges that Rebecca referred to that are really emerging as the internet becomes more and more part of our daily lives and becomes much more important to every aspect of what we do. And we were hearing through the futures work this tension coming to the fore of people trying to think about issues related to fake news or disinformation, people trying to understand how do we grapple with as Rebecca talked about, online extremism and violent content. Is the internet really going to be a force for social cohesion, or are we seeing the internet be used for dividing societies? And what do we say about that? And what we wanted to do, and in our conversations with Chatham House, was really bring the technical community fully into that conversation, and bring this community of the Internet Society fully into that conversation. I think we as a community have to be part of grappling with these problems, thinking about these problems, and finding solutions where solutions can be found. And we wanted to tee up the question of what is the role that technology can play in bringing about solutions. And I think Dr. Shah spoke to this a little bit, that some of these challenges that we see out in the world can actually be, technology and the internet can help address some of these things. So I think that was the genesis behind the conversation. And one of the things that I think came out, at least very clearly for me, and it is something that I've been seeing in the futures work that we've been doing, is this real concern that in all of the decisions that are being made, whether the decisions are about the technology or about solving these challenging social issues, that the user themselves gets lost in the solutions, right? That what is the role of the end user? Will the end user in 5 to 10 years, or groups that represent them, have a seat at the table? Or are decisions could be made by big players, by governments solving hard security problems by themselves? And this maybe goes back to a bit of what Rebecca was talking about, but are the governance systems or the decision-making systems that we have today really able to grapple with these hard social problems that are emerging, in which technology plays a role? And there's a real, I think, concern by many people. I heard this, we had a great conversation with our youth special interest group. And the comment was made, and there are all these decisions that are being made, and in 5 to 10 years, we, fully expect to be, part of these decisions, but we're worried that we won't have a seat at that table. So I think that's an important component that I would like to put on the table, is as we're dealing with these real challenging social issues, that we not revert to processes or systems where a few people get in the room and come up with a solution that's supposedly good for everybody. So that's some opening remarks, but Emily, I'll turn it back to you, and I hope we can have a fruitful conversation like we did in London a few weeks back.
Thank you very much, Sally, and to all our speakers for getting the conversation started. I'm very much looking forward to everybody's contributions. I can also already see the chat melting with so many contributions from so many people. We also had a number of questions that were posted in advance. There were well over 50 questions, and we can also think about those. But there seem to be some common themes in the speaker's opening remarks about a sort of don't blame the internet for problems that are shown through the internet, but are actually wider societal problems. But two questions really for all our speakers. One is, doesn't that sound a bit defensive? Doesn't it sound like we're not actually acknowledging problems that may come about as a result of the internet? And also, can we think about problems that do arise in and of itself, the internet itself? So, for example, the role of big data, the fact that people are increasingly profiled, the role of big companies and increasingly few big companies, if that's not a contradiction. So how do we get a positive message about, don't blame the internet? Can we turn it on its head? And what about the problems that the internet does create? Who'd like to go first? Rebecca?
Sure. Yeah. And my response, sort of, don't blame the internet, especially relates to the debates that are at forefront now about extremism online, and sort of calls by certain politicians to basically the solution is all about breaking encryption and holding companies liable, and that's sort of where I come from on that. But I do agree, the internet community and the business community must take responsibility. And I think there was a bit too much kind of naivete, sort of pie in the sky kind of thinking early on that all we need to do is exist and put the internet out there, and society will automatically become better and more free and open and democratic and prosperous and wonderful. And it's not that simple. And so the business community and the technical community does need to take responsibility vocally and clearly, that how you engineer things, what rules you put in place on your private platforms, what decisions you're making about design, you know, privacy by design versus other possible decisions about your business model. You are responsible for those, and those are contributing to broader kind of social phenomena and either enabling abuses. So, for instance, with big data, right? If you're not thinking through what you've created and how you've created it and how it relates to other systems, you are enabling a lot of abuse. So there does need to be full responsibility taken. Certainly, and then also with Facebook, right? Facebook is not blameless in many respects on many issues. They do face some hard problems for how they should cope with some of the issues. They do need to be more transparent. They do need to be more open about how their algorithms work and many other things. But what this is really about ultimately is how we hold power accountable, right? Because with the internet, there's this whole new layer of it's a whole new sphere of action and a whole new sphere through which all kinds of people, be it governments, companies, criminal organizations, NGOs, activists, journalists, can exercise power of different kinds through information flows. And so when power is abused, when that information power is used to cause harm to other people, those not only who committed the harm, but those who enabled the harm need to take responsibility for it. And that's absolutely part of how we move forward. And it is absolutely true that I think that there's a lot of magical thinking that has gone on, particularly in the first 25 years. And I think we do need to get rid of the idea that, you know, just because the internet exists, the world is going to be better. You know, I think we do believe the internet will make the world better, but it will be due to our concerted efforts to make it so, not just because we connect everybody.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just a quick follow-up on that. You described failures of governance, and I think in other contexts you've talked about this as being a Magna Carta moment. In other words, it's like there's a collective realization that the way we do things has to change. One of the things, and of course your Global Accountability Index sort of highlights the role that big companies take in mediating human rights. If it is like, well, we don't do governments anymore, or governments are failing, are we comfortable with big companies taking on that role? And do we think that these accountability measures like yours actually act as a restraint, or are they just a convenient fig leaf for companies?
So just to make clear, I am not saying that governments should cease to exist. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that we should privatize everything. I'm absolutely not saying that. I'm saying that governments are failing to do their jobs, and they have failed to evolve so that they are fit for purpose in the internet age. We absolutely need governments. I want governments to pick up my trash. I want governments to keep me safe from being attacked when I walk down my street. You know, there's all kinds of reasons why we want governments, and I don't want Facebook doing those things. I want my local government that I can hold accountable to do those things. But the problem is that governance by government hasn't evolved. We haven't figured out, you know, how sort of corporate private governance and nation state governance can interface in a way that's effective and really serves the interests of not just internet users, but people on the planet generally. And one of the problems, you know, that we've talked about before is that oftentimes governments will pass a law that affects the global internet, but they're doing it only on behalf of their constituents in their location. And it may have all kinds of consequences for people who didn't vote for that government and who disagree with that legislation, but there's nothing they can do. And so that's one of the ways in which we need to evolve. And so it's not about governments going away. It's about figuring out how to interface the geographic construct with the global privately run platforms, and making sure that the way in which governance coordinates is really, again, serving everyone's interests rather than canceling things out.
Okay.
And that's a challenge, and holding entities that are global accountable across borders, and holding governments accountable for their failures, which we're also not doing well. All of those things, we don't have the right mechanisms for that right now.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm going to turn to Dr. Shah now, because also I'd like to hear your perspective coming from a developing country where the majority of people are still yet to come online, as is the case in many developing countries. One of the things that was very interesting looking at the questions that were posted in advance of this session is that the majority, that the most popular category, if you like, were questions about access, whether they're talking about cost, speed, connecting rural communities, education and skills, local languages, and those questions also exclusively came from people from developing countries. So my question to you, Dr. Shah, is how do we connect that conversation? Because it strikes me, you know, we've just been talking with Rebecca about the role of big companies, and I was really thinking about Kathy Brown's reflection in the open session at Chatham House that people from developing countries are incredibly enthusiastic and optimistic about the future. But why is it that people from developed countries aren't more interested in getting access for the majority of the world who are still offline?
Yes, but before I try to answer that question, just 2 comments on the previous question. First of all, I mean, the governments, yes, they need to do more, but at the same time, there is a feeling that probably the government should not interfere too much in the internet. So that's one point, like it's kind of a difficult thing for the governments also. And by the way, they cannot, individual governments probably cannot do things. It's because of the nature of the government. Secondly, talking about the big companies, let's say an example of Facebook, they do have like terms that you agree to when you actually open an account there, that you will agree to these terms. The problem is that if someone violate those terms, how can you enforce that? So that's one of the major problem that they have and everyone else also have, because if you look at the terms, they are quite comprehensive in nature. So many of the problems that we see, if they are properly kind of enforced, those terms, then we won't, at least we'll see reduced issues with Facebook. Now, talking about access, that I think, of course, international companies and governments can work, but it's mainly the responsibility of the national government to connect their people. The problem that I have seen in reference to the countries that I know about has mainly been dealing with the policies. Because really, if you look at the way connectivity is provided, it is provided by the private sector. So you have private companies, these are the telecom operators who were only providing voice services. Now they are providing cellular services and mobile broadband services. And most of the developing countries, they don't have good wired infrastructure. It is mainly mobile broadband or so-called 3G and 4G and eventually 5G technologies. Now, the countries that I look at in Asia, for example, most of them have been quite, inefficient in giving out spectrum to these companies so that they can provide connectivity. They are interested in getting the upfront money from the spectrum, not really interested in the connectivity part. So that's why we have seen a reduced deployment of 3G and 4G technologies. Then they have, for the rural areas, for those who have extreme difficulties in getting connected, they do have some kind of funds which are called the Universal Service Fund, but again, they are not used efficiently. So for the connectivity part, I would mostly blame the national governments. They need to do a little more to bring their people online. Of course, international companies can help, but it's the main responsibility. And really, they don't have to do much. They don't have to actually spend out of the government funding. They just need to enable the private sector to do that. And in cases like in our case, I can give you an example. Like 3 years ago, we went for mobile broadband, and that was May 2014. And from just 3.79 million broadband, right now we are at 43 million broadband subscribers. Just the right policies, giving out the right spectrum. And the government actually didn't spend money. The government earned money from this. So, so that's one part. Then with competition, as far as the affordability part is concerned, then that comes out to the competition part. If you have enough competition, of course, the prices would reduce. Then we have the prices of the handsets, because most people in the developing country access the internet through smartphones. The prices have gone down, but again, then the government would like to tax these devices, and that will increase the prices. So you see, I would say for this part, mostly we need to, the government needs to look inside, look inward, and have good policies, not necessarily spend money, just have enabling regulatory and policy environment.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Just one question about, so you can have enabling policies, and I think you've made that point very powerfully. But my question is, how do we get, when people do go online, whether it's in developing countries or developed countries, they're often really consumers. They're not really that original ideal that many of us had, that everyone's a creator online. And so if the consequence of these enabling policies is just that everybody's on Facebook, everybody's just using one or two companies that are not actually from their region, how does that benefit the region? How does that actually get the supply chains stronger? How does that enable entrepreneurial activity at the local level?
Again, I would say, like in that case, yes, we need special policies in that, so that we encourage entrepreneurship, we encourage local business development using the internet. And actually, it is happening. I mean, I don't know if you have seen the reports that are coming out, at least out of Pakistan, but there are many things that are happening in Pakistan, many local startups, young people coming up with good ideas. Even at this time, they have won some prizes. At IGF, they have won prizes with having these innovative ideas. But I do agree with you that at least the first timers, when they come to the internet, they do only use it as a consumer. They don't, and just people who just get in touch with their families through pictures, sharing and sharing whatever they think about with their friends and families. So that part is there. It's used mostly for entertainment, but slowly and gradually we need to direct people towards this direction. And for this, I have one idea. Like, for example, we send our children to school so that they can just stay at home and learn it online, or just read the books and do things online. But we send them to school because they learn a discipline. They learn how to basically be respectful, how to interact with other human beings. So in a similar manner, maybe we need to introduce internet at a very early age in the schools, maybe in a controlled manner. And as they move out to the real world, they would have enough understanding of the internet, and they will use that internet in the most productive manner.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shah. I'm going to come now to Sally Shipman, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work in the Zoom platform, but we will just do our best. I'm really excited about how it's going to work in practice. But Sally, thank you very much, first of all, to the Internet Society for putting on this public forum and getting so many people from around the world involved in the conversation. I was very interested in your remarks about the empowerment of the user and how the individual user seems to be getting lost in the conversations. What concrete steps can we take either within the Internet Society or as communities to make sure that that is reversed and that the individual is placed at the center of people's focus?
Sure, and I will try to keep my remarks brief because I too am excited to hear from the community and to see how we can make the platform work for that kind of discussion. So I think there's obviously a lot of discussion. I don't know that I have all of the answers, but I think we need as a community, to put that issue of empowerment of end users squarely on the table. This was a concept from the Internet Society from our earliest foundings. And as I said, there's this worry that it's getting lost. And I think we at the Internet Society and groups like ours, like Rebecca's and others, need to constantly put that high on the agenda, that end users need to have the seat at the table and demand that seat at the table. There are also a lot of efforts being done to, I think, again, not just to repeat Rebecca's points, but organizations like Rebecca's, organizations beyond Consumer Reports, others are doing work to try to put more and more information in the hands of users so that they can make decisions and demand the kind of accountability that we've been talking about. So I think those kinds of steps are really crucial over the next, immediately, but certainly over the next 2 to 5 years, so that as technology rolls along at this unbelievable pace, we don't find ourselves as end users being driven by the technology. We have an opportunity to shape that technology.
Yeah. Because when we have decisions made by algorithms,
Right.
looking ahead, and you don't even know what the inputs are, what the outputs are, you just, how can the individual influence that when the algorithms are secret?
Well, I think that's certainly a conversation that's going on very actively right now in the artificial intelligence community. Some of the leading thinkers in that area have made declarations that say that this notion of ethics, the notion of humanity, must be core to the design and development of systems like artificial intelligence going forward. That these things have to go hand in hand. There's a rather nice quote I read the other day, that we need to make sure that humans remain in the driver's seat for technology, not the other way around. And so I think this is something that really requires a concerted effort by the technical community, by civil society groups, by industry, by governments. And this is something that I think we need to take very seriously.
Thank you. I was just unmuting my mic. I was wondering how I'm going to... So I'd now like to open the floor for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, can you raise your hand? And I'm going to also rely on colleagues to look at the other screens because I can only see one at the moment. Would anybody like to ask a question? If not, I could perhaps go to Nina from Bulgaria, who posted a question in the chat earlier on. Nina, if you can take the mic and just ask your question, that would really be helpful.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Nina. I'm very delighted to be part of this conversation. Because the technology empowered the users, and we are at the same time creators and consumers on the web. It's the same as we go to the grocery, so we don't want to be labeled and to be separated and have this disruption on ourselves. So I'm as a Google top contributor, I'm taking care to have this awareness about skills, about knowledge, and participation on both ways, on both sides of the screen on the web. So I'm interested to be informed on both sides as a creator and user. How is this balance going to be achieved? And now we want to as these speakers say, have seat on the table. So I'm using myself as an example and seated here to be present and to listen and to talk what I know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. So it's about getting the right balance between digital rights and open communications, and getting people more to be creators than consumers, perhaps. So have a think about that, speakers, and also if anybody in the room would like to respond to that question or post their ideas, either use the chat or put up your hand and we can go to you. Hello.
Emily, I might just,
Sally, yes.
Having been watching a little bit of the queue, I've seen Richard Hill's been active in the chat. I wonder if he wanted to, if we give him a moment or two to put his ideas on the table. And then I see our new colleague, Evelyn, and I wonder, Evelyn, if I could put you on the spot a little bit, but speak a little bit about this question about whether end users are really simply in the seat of being consumers, or whether you see a move of creators coming through, particularly in developing countries in Africa where you're sitting. But Richard,
thank you very much, Sally. So I'll go to Richard first, and then Evelyn, and then I think we've got is it Dilbingi Kalanda who's also got his hand up. So I'll take those three remarks and then we'll see where we are. Thank you. Richard, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, I don't have much to add with what I posted. I think many of us are saying the same things and reinforcing what the speakers have said. I saw quite a lot of support for both what Sally said and Rebecca said and others said. We are, I think, at a crossroads. We just have to educate governments and try to stop them doing the wrong things, which I think is a clear trend coming now. Started with mass surveillance, moved on to trying to trash privacy, and now, as one speaker put it at the WSIS forum, the 3 M's, Macron, May, and Merkel are apparently ganging together to impose some form of censorship on the basis that this will combat terrorism, which it won't, and it gives the wrong messages to all those countries which have traditionally practiced extremely drastic forms of censorship. That makes it harder to push back against them. And we do have to restore trust. I think the Digital Geneva Convention proposed by Microsoft needs some work. I don't think it can be adopted the way it is, the 3 prongs, but I think that's something that we should be all supporting and working towards. And I think from what I've seen, ISOC is going in the right direction and saying the right things. And certainly this event and the summary of the discussions at Chatham that you've given here make me believe that and reinforce my belief. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Evelyn, and then I'm going to come to Dibungi Kalenda.
Hi, thank you very much. I think for me, I'll speak about the role of the internet in enabling innovation and entrepreneurship, especially from where I come from in Uganda, and I could speak for Africa at large. I think we are seeing more youth, especially driving a lot of content online and doing a lot in using technology to shape a lot of what they do, whether it's in healthcare or transportation, or finding so many of the challenges that they have within community and using the internet in solving that. So I definitely see a very good trend in end users really coming up and seeing the solutions that they need by using the internet.
Thank you very much. Dibungi, I hope I've pronounced that right. If you're speaking, can you unmute your mic? Yeah, got you.
Yeah, you are saying it right. I am Dibungi Kalenda from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I am giving the example of my own country. we have an optical cable from the city of Moanda on the Atlantic Ocean to the border with Zambia. On the other side, we are connected to Congo-Brazzaville, our neighbor, and from the capital of Congo-Brazzaville, we are also connected to Pointe Noire on the Atlantic Ocean. So we have the infrastructure in our country, but the internet is too slow. The bandwidth is too slow. We have this backbone, this cable, but the internet remains, the bandwidth remains too slow, and the prices are too high. We have the cable, but the commercial internet providers continue to use the VSAT, and the prices, as I said, are still too high. How can ISO contribute to develop high-speed internet in Africa, in the countries where they are already good infrastructure, and how can ISO contribute to give us to foster, to develop affordable internet?
Thank you.
I see on internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we've got a whole range of questions there for, and please, members of the panel and others, jump in on whichever one we speaks to you most, or you feel like you can contribute most. We've heard of the Digital Geneva Convention as something that might be a possible way forward. Evelyn talking about entrepreneurship in developing countries. Dibungi making a very strong case about, you know, it's not just getting the infrastructure, we need to think about prices, we need to think about speed and what the role of the internet society is. And there were many more issues raised, but let's just start with those. Sally, can I come to you first on the speed and cost and the role of the internet, and then I'll go to the other speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. I think our colleague from the Congo hits on a very important point. Infrastructure is not sufficient. It's a necessary component, but there is the need to have the entire, what we call at the Internet Society, the enabling environment, the policy environment surrounding that infrastructure that helps to create the competition that's necessary, the rules of the road, the policy framework in which prices can come down, in which access can be achieved, and in which then the entrepreneurship that Evelyn spoke about can thrive. So not knowing all the specifics of the Congo's environment, but as you describe it, the infrastructure is there, but it's the policy frameworks that need to be developed to deliver on that access. And this is absolutely crucial for the future. It is not sufficient to simply have access to infrastructure. People have to be able to benefit from that infrastructure, take advantage of the opportunities that it brings, or the digital divide simply becomes a different kind of divide going forward. So it's not just about boxes and cables and wires and spectrum. It is about the ability to really take advantage of the opportunities that come from that infrastructure.
Thank you. And we've got a comment from the chat room which says, and we're back to the inability of law and policy to keep up with technology, which is, you know, an old adage, in fact, becoming a familiar phrase in these circles. Dr. Shah, would you like to address any of the questions?
I kind of addressed this question partly, earlier. It's mainly the government's policies, the national government's policy. In some cases, there are restrictions, like if you are a landlocked country, and of course you will have restriction, you will have, not restrictions, but you will have this issue with connecting with the rest of the world because you are dependent on other countries, not on submarine cable. Other than that, it's mostly the national policies, how open they are in inviting foreign investment and increasing competition for the access part. So this is the issue, and I agree with Sally when she said that maybe this issue, like not having affordable internet and not having affordable or the accessibility part not there for all the areas, it may also create another digital divide, because you will have people who have access, lots of access, and they will be using internet for all kind of businesses and enhancing their skills and coming up with new companies and entrepreneurship. And then you would have people who would actually even lag behind from where they are currently. So this is an issue that actually the national government needs to consider, and they need to be realized the importance of the access to the internet. As you know, some of the countries, they have made the access to the internet as a basic human right. So this is what we need to believe in, that it is a basic human right, like all the other rights that we have as humans.
And to build on that point, and also to bring in Evelyn's points, once you've got cost and speed sorted out, you also need incentives for people to get online, whether as entrepreneurs or because they can find locally relevant content. How do governments or other actors overcome current challenges to that? Because English is still the language of 50% of websites, isn't it, of web content? So how do we start to strengthen those supply chains and get locally relevant content working?
Yes, you are right. I mean, that's one of the challenges that the governments need to address. Content on local languages. One way that they can do it is that they already have so much content available, because they have the television for a long time, they had radio for a long time. So all those contents are available. In our case, for example, we have a full-fledged virtual university, and they have a YouTube channel also, which again, it's not totally in local language, but it's kind of a mix of local languages and English. The other important thing beside the content is the application. What does the government use the internet for? How can they use it, for example, for providing loans through financial inclusion to the farmers? How can they reach out the women in the rural areas? How they include the persons with disabilities in their policies? So the government actually has to come up with all these different applications, which encourages the people to go online and use the government, have access to the government resources and services.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shah. Could I, before coming to you, Rebecca, I know I've got Dr. Edewede, if that's the right pronunciation, yes, waiting with a question. Can I take that question and then come to you, Rebecca?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Fantastic. So I wouldn't say I have a question. I think I just want to maybe make some contributions, if that's all right with you guys. Hello, everybody. So I noticed that we said something about people from developing countries not being able to create, not being maybe creators and contributing in that from that perspective to the internet that we already have. And I was just going to say, eventually, people will create and contribute to the internet. If you look at the way the internet was set up, the way it started, we already have a good basis on which to work. For instance, I'm doing some work in Internet of Things, and the history of the Internet of Things begins with the internet, then social media, then the Internet of Things. We already have this strong foundation. If you look at social media, it's not necessarily a creation. It was something that was enabled through the created internet. So even if the developing world doesn't create a fresh thing as strong and as important as the internet, as long as they can contribute something significant, something useful to the world, which is what is already going on. Your first original speaker, I don't really remember her name, the first lady that spoke at the beginning of this event today, I think she said she's traveled the world. At the last event you had in May, I think, is it Kathy?
I think that was Kathy Brown, who's the president of the Internet Society.
Yes, I think she's somebody really that a lot of more of us need to listen to, because when she spoke, I think it was in May in Chatham House, she really came across as somebody who has really been to developing countries and to Arab nations, and you could see that she had a very fair view of what's going on. So give it time, give people time. They will begin to blossom. They will begin to come out. Businesses, people are becoming wealthier as the days go by through the internet that enables them to survive. As long as they are given the connectivity, which is what ISOC is about, I suppose, they will find a way around any problems, okay? But they might not create an internet, but at least they will create something that can be bolted on and used for the rest of humanity possibly. That's the first point. The second one is talking about privacy.
Just very quickly, because I've got other people waiting. So just a very quick second point, very, very quickly.
Okay. Talking about privacy and people from developing countries and governments interfering. If you look also at the development of the internet, compare the Western world with the non-Western world. I'm from Nigeria, I grew up there, and before moving to the UK, people in developing countries, again, tend to find a way around privacy problems. It's there you start to see people coming up with software tools that they can use to evade, hacker, prevent people from listening to their communications. Take a very good example of people from Russia, from the history that I read, because they were behind the Iron Curtain, they had to make do with old technologies. And that's why if you look today, you get some very smart hackers from Russia. Go to China, look at places around Africa. People will find a way around these problems. As long as you give them the connectivity, they will shoot forward and make as much progress as they need to survive. I mean, like I said, I grew up there. We had the minimum when I was there, but we made it work. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Edewede. Rebecca, I'd like to come to you. Thank you for your patience. I've seen you in very active in the chat room. And then there's been a very interesting point raised by Paula Corte Real. And I'd like Paula to come to the microphone next, if I may, after Rebecca. Thank you. Rebecca, please, can I have your reactions to...
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on, both in the verbal discussion as well as in the text chat going on, and so this is fabulous on both fronts. And there was one point that was raised by someone in Singapore named Benjamin Ong, sort of raising a concern that it's sort of difficult to work with government these days when they're blaming the internet for all of the problems, and what do we do? And I mean, this is tough, because it does seem, I mean, my observation has been that whenever we get good policy advanced, or whenever we stop something bad from happening, it tends to be the result of a three-part coalition, really, where you have civil society and the private sector, and some elements, at least, from government and politics aligning together to push forward something positive or to stop something bad from happening. And so you do need allies in government. Even if the triple M's don't get it, are there people in those parliaments who get it? But I think it's also really important, and again, this speaks to the fact that I'm not saying we should give up on government. Actually, we need more people from this community running for office, getting involved with politics, getting involved with government, and working to innovate and reform it and make it work better for our digital world, and that's an incredibly important thing. And I've seen some people. There's several people from the Global Voices community that have run for office in different parts of the world. Mong Palatino, who's our Southeast Asia editor for a long time, ran for parliament there, and was in the legislature and played a really important role in moving things in the right direction. And so yeah, it's very important.
Run for office. Yes, thank you for that encouragement to all of us. Paula, if you're still in the room, can I come to you to speak to the issue that you've raised in the chat room? Paula?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you.
Okay. What I tried to say here was, like, I've noticed that I think I'm one of the only ones under 25. I've seen there's a lot of people under 25 as well, people who said on the chat. But my question is about how can we bring young people into the discussion? Because we're talking about the future. We are talking about end users future or about people who are going to play important roles in developing internet ecosystems in the future. So, I mean, there's probably young people now, they're going to play those important roles in the future. And I mean, how can we bring young people that are already connected and also young people that are not connected yet into the discussion, because they're going to they're going to play an important role on the internet's future. So they're going to shape the internet's future. So my question is, how can we bring young people into this equation? And if everyone sees how important it is for us to bring young to this kind of discussion, because they are really important people, and most of the part they are aside the discussions. And my question is that.
Thank you very much. And Damola, on the chat as well, you've been responding to that. Did you want to add any remarks to what Paula is saying?
Yeah, sure. Okay, great.
Please go ahead.
Okay, Paula raised a few issues that are quite important, and I share similar sentiments. Beyond bringing young people on board, I'm also thinking in terms of inclusion. You know, things are evolving right away, and I'll take it from the point of view of the digital economy. We're thinking about digital citizenship. We're thinking about artificial intelligence and the way it's going to shape our future. So how do we, in the discourse, shaping inclusion of individuals, organizations, or people across board, especially in the global south, that are either been affected by this? I know that you had previously talked about AI governance, and it was mentioned that, yes, there are lots of concerted efforts in that process, but I need us to be much more practical. What are the various things that really need to be done for us to be able to say evidently that, yes, the consumers or the end users or the people using the internet, especially from the global south, are in charge or have entries into the governance of artificial intelligence?
Okay, thank you very much, Damola. Sally, can I ask you to sort of address this point of what the Internet Society is doing to involve youth in the conversation and what more could be done? And perhaps Dr. Shah, you can add some thoughts to this as well. Sally.
Absolutely. I think Paola makes an absolutely excellent point. And there's a real worry that a generation is coming online, at least in developed countries, who assume the internet will always be there. They assume that the values that created it will persist. And I think it's first and foremost crucial that we not take that for granted, and particularly that young people not take the internet for granted. That they try to shape the internet of the future. And to Paola's point, for those that want to, how do we remove the barriers so that their voices can be part of that conversation? At the Internet Society, we have a number of initiatives underway. There's as I mentioned earlier, a special interest group for the youth that is increasingly active in the Internet Society, and I just can't say enough about how delighted we are to have that group formed, and we hope that the energy there will translate across borders. There's an effort right now under 25, and there are others on this call who can speak a bit more about that. But again, this idea of making sure that the internet of the future is shaped by the people of the future, and so I think that's a really, really crucial point. The other point that was raised of, how do we ensure that these multiple voices are in the conversation? I would just say that really goes to how the Internet Society is our basic foundations, which is a community of diverse stakeholders that organize, and many of them organize via chapters in local communities that can help, work with policymakers or industries or communities to say we need to have diverse stakeholders coming together to help make the internet better in our local communities. And we see our chapters doing this around the world. And so I would make a plug for people, if you're not part of a local chapter, that is a way, very tangibly on the ground in your local community to ensure that multiple voices are heard and part of the internet discussion in your country.
Thank you very much. There's been some really interesting remarks made on the chat in relation to youth involvement. Aina, are you near a microphone? Can you come and share your thoughts with us? Aina or Aina? Okay, Dr. Shah, maybe you'd like to address this point of youth involvement, and then I'm going to come to, we'll just in the last few minutes, I think we've got another round of questions, and I want to talk about internet shutdowns. Okay, so Dr. Shah, youth, in a minute. 1 minute
Yeah.
on youth, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, all the minutes are for youth. The problem that I see is that, I mean, when I look at the policymakers, especially the members of the National Assembly, they are like, they don't use the internet either, or they are digital immigrants. On the other hand, the youth, they don't get into the lawmaking part. They don't interact with the government that much. So there is clearly a gap, like, and there is a negative view among the youth about the government's policies related to the internet, especially, among many other things. So this needs to be bridged, and one effort that we have started, at least, is that we have started to go and visit schools, and we have started to visit universities on different occasions. Like, for example, in the universities, they usually have their final year projects, and we go there and talk to them. And I specifically, and a few other of my colleagues, have talked to them about the internet and the issues related to that, of using it responsibly, especially the social media. Before this, as you said, some of the comments were saying that many of the youth, they take internet for granted. So if they don't use it responsibly, the people who are in charge of the lawmaking may take this facility away or restrict it. So there needs to be more communication. We need to involve the youth more and communicate with each other more.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to add in a couple of comments from the chat. Aina Muriel has said, I think we must insert internet education in all school levels, and youth must have a precise goal about the using of internet, i.e. to promote economic activity, I suppose, using the internet. I've got a question. I'd like to just shift our emphasis now to talk about internet shutdowns. That's just come up recently on the chat. Is it Anthony Otieno or Otieno Anthony? Would you like to make your point on the microphone? You're very welcome to. Anthony Otieno? Okay. The point is that internet shutdowns or disruptions depend on how knowledgeable state officers are to address local pertinent issues, you know, as the Internet Society, we need to build capacity within governments on how to use the internet proactively. So perhaps I can sort of throw that open to the floor. We've got 13 minutes left. We also have, is it Taral Kawison, who has their hand up. So would you like to come in? I think it might be on the youth issue, but please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. It is exciting to hear this dialogue. I did put a comment in chat that the Internet Society is very committed to youth. As Kathy has noted, youth are our future and the future is now. And so we have several efforts. Certainly the Youth SIG is exciting. We have the 25 under 25, where we're looking for 25 individuals who are using the internet to make a difference. But these are just elements around a longer arc of how do we all effectively engage youth to advance the internet that we want to see. So we are doing a listening campaign this year to understand what's important to youth about the internet, what they see as some of their challenges. And we are looking for input. So all of this dialogue taking place right now will help inform what we can collectively do to effectively engage. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Rebecca, can I come to you? There's been a lot of conversation since you last joined in the chat. So we've talked about youth. There was a question about internet shutdowns. There has been other questions raised about a digital Geneva Convention, which I'd like to also just hear your thoughts on. Do we need more conventions? So just some thoughts and reactions on what you're hearing or what you're engaged in the chat would be really useful at this point.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot. You know, I think with conventions, again, it says a convention among whom, for whom, toward what interest, and whether you call it a convention or whether there's some other way of, I mean, basically the point is to reach agreement about problems that aren't being addressed properly. At this point in time, and we do have some real issues with, you know, governments trying to assert extraterritorial sovereignty over data in different places. You know, we have all kinds of issues related to, you know, who has access to data under what circumstances, whether encryption should, you know, whether strong encryption should even be allowed. There are all these issues that we don't have good mechanisms for reaching agreement on. And so I think we are in a phase of experimentation somewhat. And I think, you know, there's been some back and forth within the chat about whether kind of Microsoft's proposed digital Geneva Convention is exactly right, or you know, and I think it's the start of a conversation, really. I mean, that's kind of how I view it, rather than, okay, let's take it, you know, just as it is. It's the start of a conversation about how do we set norms and standards of behavior and policy across borders in a way that protects rights, that enables businesses to do their business and serve their customers, and also respect their customers' rights in a consistent way. And right now we don't have the right mechanisms for that. So I think, you know, again, we're at the very beginning, I think, of a period of experimentation and ideas, you know, there's going to be a lot of trial and error. But I also don't think that there's going to be any one treaty or kind of overarching thing that's going to solve all the problems, or overarching governance model either. I mean, I think we're going to have different communities who have expertise and who are affected by specific problems coming together in different types of multi-stakeholder configurations that won't be according to the same model for each problem. We're in a very messy period, but I think, you know, one of the common themes is also that people need to get involved. People need to take ownership, that the internet is not just like the water we drink and the air we breathe, which those themselves are somewhat endangered in many places, but nonetheless, you know, that how the internet evolves depends on the extent to which we are all involved with it, and both demanding of governments, demanding of companies, that our interests and rights be respected, but also be part of coming up with solutions.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm going to bring in Harish Pillai on this point about the Digital Geneva Convention, so that Harish, if you have the microphone, please give us your thoughts on it.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for that. Yeah, Digital Geneva Convention was suggested by a large technology company, and I think while it makes sense to probably consider that, that entire idea of a Geneva Convention was a nation-state driven activity. So what needs to be done is we need to find I hate the phrase multi-stakeholder, but that's what we have, to be able to make sure that we don't miss out on engaging the end users and everybody in the picture about digital rights from securing the internet from a cybersecurity perspective, which is really what that idea is all about. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you very much. We've got just over 5 minutes left. So could I just ask Sally and Dr. Shah for like one sentence on reflecting on what you've heard today and what you think next steps could be to take this conversation on. Sally?
Sure, I may take the prerogative of more than one sentence, but I will be brief. I'm very encouraged by the discussion here. I'm encouraged by that there's some common perspectives and common threads that come across. We hear, of course, that the issues of access and meaningful access to the internet still reign supreme in many parts of the world. We hear concerns that the governance structures we have in place today aren't ready for the challenges of the future. And I think that gives organizations like ours and our community an imperative to ensure that this notion of multi-stakeholder governance, while, as I always say, it is not a religion, but it is a way of getting things done. It is a way of a new way of operating in the internet space, and that provides a platform for future solutions. And the other thing I would say is that I believe that this community, the technical community, this community of the Internet Society must be at the forefront of these discussions about how we deal with these very real and very hard problems that are emerging in the internet environment. So I think we need to take those problems seriously, look at them hard, and use the tools and the models that we have to move the conversation forward.
Thank you very much, and for that excellent summary of the conversations so far. Dr. Shah, just one sentence or so on what you've heard today and what we should do next.
Well, I'm greatly encouraged by the discussion that we had, and as pointed out, one of the issues that developing countries are facing is still access. That needs to be worked on, and we need to have them with good national policies, and we need to continue this multi-stakeholder approach of discussion. One point that I really like to see for the future is that maybe we take one important point from this discussion and hold a specific discussion around that point. So you take access, or you take the shutting down of internet, or the social media platforms, and have concentrated discussion on that part only.
Thank you. That's a very practical discussion. Rebecca, your one sentence on what to do next and what you've heard today. I think you're still on mute, so please unmute.
Sorry. We're entering into really, I think, the rest of our lifetimes. This is going to be a difficult and uncertain period, and we have to keep trying. We have to keep working on it. We can't give up hope. We have to continue to believe that the result of our efforts over time, the efforts of every individual, if we make the effort, things will get better. But history doesn't go in a straight line, and I think we're in for a bumpy up and down ride coming up.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. We've got like 2 minutes left, so I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. But before that, to also reflect on how much ground we've covered in these remarks and in our conversations today. There's also probably a book being written in the chat room, which I haven't had time to follow in depth, but we have covered issues from access, not just the bare access, if you like, but affordable access, fast access, meaningful content, the role of young people as entrepreneurs, as users. We've also talked about the role of big companies, what's happening with human rights, how our leaders, particularly the British leader, is getting it totally wrong on encryption. We've talked about privacy, of freedom of expression, digital Geneva Conventions. What really strikes me about this crowd, the Internet Society, what we have today, is as Rebecca said, there's a real shared purpose, and Sally mentioned this as well, and real shared perspectives despite an incredibly international and diverse group of people. However, going forward, we shouldn't forget that there are people not in this conversation who don't necessarily agree. And that to make real progress, we've got to start to cross over out of our comfort zone where everyone gets it and everyone agrees, to talk to people like Theresa May or Angela Merkel, who are looking at people, their own citizens that they're supposed to be keeping safe, being murdered, and trying to find a solution. It's no wonder that they are casting around for something, anything. And we have got to, and it's also interesting to reflect on what wasn't mentioned today. In Chatham House, we do talk a lot about security, and we do talk a lot about warfare and cyber war and how these technologies are also changing that. We talk about state interference in elections and what may or may not be happening. So there are people out there who don't necessarily agree with us and who are having different conversations. And I would perhaps encourage the Internet Society to bring this incredibly strong and vibrant community out to a wider audience and engage with the people who disagree, who aren't part of the conversation, even if that's a bit uncomfortable. So with that, I would like to say a huge thank you to the organisers of this public forum, Carly, the whole team at the Internet Society, who've been working incredibly hard behind the scenes to make sure that all things run smoothly. So a huge thank you to them, to Konstantinos, to Sally, to the whole team, and of course to our wonderful panelists, Rebecca MacKinnon, Dr. Shah and Sally Shipman. Thank you all. I'm going to close this session now, and let's have the next, look forward to the next conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I just wanted to say thanks very much to you for leading a terrific discussion today. It isn't easy to kind of collate all this information that's coming to us in such a vibrant and excitable way. So you've done such a great job. Thank you very much to all our panelists as well, and our community for joining us. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be able to have such a dynamic discussion. I just wanted to say that the link to the recording will be made available on the open forum tomorrow, and it's also available immediately on the ISOC Facebook page. Thanks once again. I know we're out of time, so I'll wrap up, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.